Hey guys, Chris here from Carolot Farm. It's now early September. I cannot believe it. I keep saying that. Time is flying so fast. I want to show you around the garden today because we're getting some really great new crops coming in. And I also have so much to catch up on and so many things to do. I was out of town at a horse show for 4 days. And again, as we head into the fall, there's just more prep. So I want to take you around and catch you up. The first update I want to share with you is on our second batch of green beans here. I planted these, I'd have to look at the calendar, it feels like 6 weeks or more ago. And they grew really well. It could have been 8 weeks. I don't know. I think it was July though. Again, it's now September, so I've lost all track of time. But needless to say, our second batch of green beans were totally ready to be harvested. I got a huge pile of them here. I picked these yesterday evening and I only picked about 2/3 of this bed behind me. And so I do need to circle back today and pick the rest of them. But this is a pretty sizable tub of beans. And from previous experience, once we do this first harvest of beans, I should be able to come back in another week or two and get a second harvest, if not a third. Now, of course, this is the largest. The first harvest is always going to be the biggest. But we should continue to get beans for the next several weeks, which is really exciting. I did just run back in the house and I double-checked the date of when I planted my beans here. I planted the second batch on July 12th. And so it looks like they have been growing right at 8 weeks. So that's a pretty good crop, you know, a nice turnaround. And given our temperatures, I expect that these plants will be pretty happy for the next few weeks. And like I told you earlier, we'll continue to pick a few more, but this first boom is generally the largest. Our okra here, you can see this plant here is already taller than I am, and I don't believe it's the tallest. And so our okra is growing very well. We're beginning to get several sizable pods up towards the top. And we're really having to harvest every day. If we don't harvest every day, we end up with pods that are a little too large and they're getting a little tough. So the okra is doing fantastic. We have been giving so much okra away though because it's way more than we can eat. And even though we've used a few batches for soups and other things, we like to make gumbo out of it. It's more than we really can process. So it's a fun crop because not everyone grows it. It's not as accessible in the grocery stores. And so it's always fun to share it with family and friends. I've just finished picking half of my okra. I have 2 rows on one side of my center path and then 2 rows on the other side. And so this is a full container's worth off of, again, half of my okra plants. But I wanted to show you something really quick. I mentioned that if we don't pick our okra every day, the pods get a little too large. And here you can see that. The smaller pod, I would say, is what I consider to be kind of the more ideal size of okra. This larger pod, we probably missed when we were picking yesterday, maybe the day before. It's pretty big. And once they get to be this size, it's a 50-50 toss-up. Sometimes you go to slice them and they're just really woody and you don't want to eat them. And sometimes they're still tender enough. This one feels tender still, so we might be able to eat it. But again, we do try to go for the smaller size. It's anywhere from 2 to 2.5 inches long, and that's what I would consider ideal for okra. Something else that I have started to do this year, which I've not done before, is actually trim my okra plants. Some of these longer branches are beginning to turn brown, and rather than wait for them to dry up and fall off on their own, I'm going to go ahead and snip them, and that way they will not be draining any undue energy from the plant. For example, here is a leaf. I can see it's already turning yellow, so I know it is probably on its way out. And I'm going to follow that branch down. And I know I'm totally out of focus here, so sorry. But I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to snip that branch, and that way I can just remove it. It allows a little more light and such, and again, it will not be taking up any more nutrients from the plant. More can go into the new blooms and new pods. Here is a lower branch that has been allowed to dry up all on its own. I will still snip it, but you can see that it is very typical for okra to do this. The bottom branches will die and dry up and fall off, and the new growth will just continue upwards. So I'm just helping the plant do what it naturally does. Here is an okra pod that got a little too large many weeks ago, and rather than cut something that we weren't going to eat, we left it here on the plant so that it could eventually dry like this other one beneath it, and that is where we will harvest our seeds for next year. All of our okra that you see here came from seeds that we did this very same thing with a few years ago. These seeds we harvested, I think it was back in 22. I said whatever the date was when I planted these because I had written it on my sandwich bag. I don't have the bag and I don't remember. So without going back to my original video, I think it was 22 though. But they had some age on them, and we actually planted last year's crop. I know was from these same seeds, and so were the seeds this year. So again, you can absolutely save your own seeds and start your own plants. If you are considering saving your own seeds though, it is recommended that you go ahead and let them dry on the plant like this one here. You know, if you pick the pod now when it's green and then bring it into the house, sometimes they just spoil. So the best thing is to go ahead, leave them on your plant until they're good and dry, and then you can harvest them, pop open the pods, remove the seeds, and just pop them into a sandwich bag. You might be wondering, what type of okra do we have? It's another hard question for me to answer sometimes. I know what I used to buy was the Clemson spineless and I think the emerald. And those were the two varieties that I believe we had planted the year that we harvested seeds. But again, I just harvested random pods. I didn't keep track of what was what. And so similar to my cherry tomatoes, it's kind of a hodgepodge, but everything seems to be very happy, whatever it is. And because we pick everything when it's pretty tender, none of the pods get too big. I think the Clemson spineless sometimes seems to be like a fatter pod versus the emerald, which is like longer and a little more slender, but I could have that backwards. But again, we try to pick everything when it's really tender, and it's hard to tell what's what at this point. Our butternut squash here, we planted back on July 16th. And the vines are growing very nicely. They're beginning to climb up the fence line that we gave them. And I can see that we have anywhere from 6 to 8 or more nice gourds forming, but they will need about another month's time to finish maturing. And then they'll turn that nice kind of golden brown when they're ripe. But they're looking good. Right around the time that we planted our butternut squash and our second batch of green beans, the groundhog did get into the garden again. And so once the vines started to grow, we did put an extra fence around them. And so they have this additional perimeter barrier. That green planter is over there just to kind of help block any critters from going under the fence. So again, we're doing what we can to keep the groundhog out. Fingers crossed, you know, we can get another month's growth here, but you just never know. It's part of gardening. Like the butternut squash, we have definitely covered our green beans, having had them nipped badly last year, so they're doing well. But the next crop that I think I need to cover today, which I want to show you, are our fall crops of broccoli, cauliflower, and cabbage. We planted these about 2 weeks ago, and so far so good. I've been putting deer spray on them as a deterrent, but they do need to be covered just for added protection. Here's a look at the cabbage. I did put them in the silver planter, and like the broccoli and cauliflower, we will want to cover them hopefully today. As I try to finish up here in the garden showing you around, the wind is picking up. I can't complain, it feels great, but it's hard to film. Our sweet potatoes, though, have done so well. They're beginning to yellow. They're approaching the end of their growing season. And I would have to say this has probably been the easiest crop of the 2025 summer season. You know, the pests have not been hard on them. The groundhog has left them alone. They've had plenty of time to grow. And so I cannot wait to see how many potatoes are hiding underneath the ground in just a few more weeks. And then there were the sad pumpkins. The pumpkins have had a really hard go. Not only did they get overgrown with some weeds, but even worse than that, I'll have to show you has been the groundhog. You know, the groundhog came and got into this pumpkin before I could cover it and kind of secure it. And then I thought, oh great, I'll put little cages around my pumpkins to let them mature. And I went to the horse show a few days ago, and I was going to give this beautiful pumpkin just a few more days to finish turning nice and orange. And while I was gone, that stinking groundhog came over, pulled it out from under the cage, and just bit into it. I'm just so irritated with that groundhog. So again, my poor pumpkins, they have probably had the hardest time this summer between the squash bugs and the groundhog and just the weeds and everything else. This was probably one of the sadder crops of the summer season. I was able to salvage a few pumpkins here and there, some little teeny guys, a couple medium-sized pumpkins, but it was not near the crop that I was hoping to have. Maybe we'll have more luck next year. Another pretty prolific producer in the garden have been our volunteer cherry tomatoes. We have them scattered here, there, and everywhere, but this particular patch is probably the thickest here behind me. I think it's a group of 3 or 4 plants. You know, I have picked more cherries than I really know what to do with. We are always trying to give them away. They're really, really tasty, and they're a little time consuming to pick, so I come out not as often as I should. We have a lot that just fall to the ground, but that just means they'll reseed for next year, so it all works out. I couldn't not tell you about the peppers and the tomatoes though, right? They're still doing well. Our tomatoes are having a little bit of a second surge, and so we're harvesting a few, but it's very slow. The peppers are still doing well. The bell peppers are especially doing well. Some of the hot peppers are beginning to dry up, but again, it's been a great, great summer for growing peppers and tomatoes. And then there was squash and zucchini. Those plants have just been producing for like 2 months now, which I don't think I've ever had a growing season quite that long. So I've been really, really happy with them. They're looking a little sad now. They're limping along. We're still getting a few yellow squash every couple of days. I did just harvest a zucchini or 2. Where's that one zucchini plant? Like, this one plant is still going. And I have picked maybe 2 zucchini in the last week, which is kind of funny because there was a long stretch where I didn't have any zucchini. So again, these crops are beginning to kind of dwindle. It's September, can't blame them. It's September 9th, I believe. And, you know, there are other crops coming in and doing well. So that's the cycle in the garden. It's, you know, it's fun, it's new, every day is different. I don't think I'm gonna get any greens into the ground. That was something I had hoped to do. We'd like to plant both collards and kale, but I'm feeling it might be a little too late for that, especially with the cooler weather we've been having. We'll see. Maybe I'll get them in, maybe I won't. But so far, I'm really happy to have the broccoli, the cauliflower, and the cabbage in. And then we'll keep harvesting okra and peppers and green beans for as long as they last. And then there's the butternut. You know, again, fingers crossed we can get another month of growth. So I'm feeling really good heading into fall. Thanks for joining us. I hope you've enjoyed this kind of early September update in the garden, and hope to see you soon. Bye, guys.